Pope Leo XIV appealed to the world's major powers for no more wars in his first Sunday message to crowds in St. Peter's Square since his re-election or election as pontiff, rather. The new Pope, elected on May 8, called for an authentic and lasting peace in Ukraine, a ceasefire in Gaza, and the release of all Israeli hostages held by militant group Hamas. Speaking in fluent Italian, Leo also welcomed the recent fragile ceasefire between India and Pakistan, negotiated overnight, and said he was praying to God to grant the world the miracle of peace.
Fratelli e sorelle, l'immane tragedia della Seconda Guerra Mondiale terminava 80 anni fa, l'8 maggio.
Pope Leo XIV has delivered his first Sunday noon blessing as Pope. He was on the loggia here and he made an impassioned appeal for a just and genuine peace in Ukraine, an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. He's picking up the tradition of the Sunday noon appearance, but he's doing it with a slight twist. In addition from delivering it from the loggia, he also sang the Regina Coeli prayer. This is the Latin prayer that is spoken at this time of year after Easter. In the more recent past, the popes have just recited it. He chose to sing it, which is a more traditional way of doing it. The crowd was about 100,000 people. It was very festive, lots of music and marching bands. Pope Leo will be back here next Sunday for his formal installation mass. That signals the real start of his papacy.
Oh, there's so much to talk about. We have Dr. Laskiewicz, who is a family affairs, joining us to talk about the China-US trade talks, Pope Leo XIV, as it relates to any political significance of the Pope and the Russian proposal for direct talks with Ukraine. Marek, good to have you join us. Now, there's the U.S. and other countries, but then there's the U.S. and China, the two biggest economies in the world. Trump has floated 80% of tariffs on China after raising it as high as 145%. Now, the talks have entered day 2. I mean, I think that's been wrapped up already. What can we expect, Marek, from the talks?
The key point is that the talks have gone ahead at all and have extraordinarily apparently arrived at a deal already. It's quite clear that both China and America do not want to have trade at a standstill, and this is forcing their hand. I therefore expect both of them to make a mutual cut in tariffs, but nowhere near 0% or anything like that, but simply enough to get trade moving. There will be obviously many details which will be released tomorrow, but the overall message is the economy is not going to go, the world economy, into global recession just yet because of extraordinarily high tariffs. They were bound to come down. There will be trade. And so from that point of view, it's good news all round.
Now, we look forward to the details of that, meeting from Switzerland. But the U.S. can deal blows at other nations and not feel any impact from them. But that's not the same with China. How different is it dealing with China when you're trying to work out a deal like this?
Well, the key point about China is that it really does depend upon export money from America coming in. And as a result, the moment American market is closed or threatened to be closed, China goes into recession. In order to obviate this, China agreed to open talks, and from that point of view is the weaker partner of the two, because America isn't that fussed. Many of the companies have indeed started to find other places where they can manufacture the goods if they're not to come from China. So the system in America, obviously the capitalist system there, is far more flexible. And in this sense, it is China who's having to make, I think, more concessions.
Now, how concerned, let's just take this away from all of the, the details that we look forward to tomorrow. How concerned should the U.S. be with the seeming closeness between China and Russia militarily? This is about the, in reference to the Soviet Union days back and the recent military display by both countries a few days ago. How concerned should the U.S. be?
Well, if President Donald Trump were a normal president, he would be concerned because China and Russia together and clearly ever more together, ever closer, would be a worry. But President Donald Trump, as far as I can tell, believes America is strong enough to take on everybody, including China and Russia together. So he hasn't given much sign that he's greatly concerned. In any case, China has agreed to hold talks about trade, and Russia is agreeing to talks with Ukraine. And therefore, from this point of view, even though China and Russia are close, they are making, if you like, moves to which are showing that the American position is correct and that they will not actually be directly engaging in any sort of trade or military or any sort of hostilities, including diplomatic, with the USA. On this point of view, Trump is winning.
Indeed. That takes me to the Russia-Ukraine talks. Finally, Putin is open to direct talks with Ukraine, as meant to come into play on Thursday. This is a welcome development, isn't it? And what is likely to come out of these talks? There seems to be sketchy differences here and there. Ukrainian president says there have to be a halt and, ceasefire. There have to be a ceasefire deal, rather. And the Putin says, well, we have to go into direct talks. The details there seems to be difference on both sides of the divide.
Yes, and they're quite fundamental differences. Again, the important point is that America is prepared, or has forced rather, Ukraine to go to these talks, and that Russia has agreed clearly to try and keep on the good side of Trump to having direct talks. So far, a win for Donald Trump. However, none of the issues which divide the two countries are being dealt with. Ukraine wants a 30-day ceasefire. Russia does not. There will be no ceasefire tomorrow. On the other hand, Russia has limited its attacks ever since the fallout from the attack it made when afterwards Donald Trump accused President Putin of just stringing him along. And therefore, what is significant is the lack of military activity in comparison to previous times. From this point of view, Russia is quite clearly willing to reach an agreement, but apart from the ceasefire, there are many other problems. Ukraine is not prepared to recognize Russian control over anything at present. There was some talk it might agree with Ukraine, but this seems to have evaporated. Russia, for her part, is totally unwilling to accept that Ukraine can be anything other than a neutralized state, and as a result, Ukraine will be open to attack. Sure, there'll be security guarantees. However, there's a problem with security guarantees. Ukraine had them before. In 1994, they were given guarantees, and Russia invaded all the same. So there still remain important differences to be bridged. But the key point is they will be talking, apparently on Thursday.
Now, do you see this proposition by Putin as a way of dividing, Europe and Ukraine, or the U.S.?
It's actually, I think, the other way around. President Putin simply doesn't rate Europe. He wants primarily to stay in America's good books, and that is why he's willing to make any sort of concession, such as these direct talks. I don't think, has taken much notice of the Europeans, except, so to speak, to quite deftly get round them, because they were saying there must be a ceasefire immediately. But what he said was there must be talks immediately, in that way showing the Europeans that they're not important, while simultaneously making a move to appease Trump. So the key point is, it's not so much he's trying to divide Europe from Russia, as that he rates only USA and simply does not rate Europe much.
That takes me to also, the issue of the Pope calling for peace in Gaza, in, India, which, of course, there's been a violation over there. There's a talk for another time. And then for the issue with Ukraine and Russia. The new American Pope, Leo XIV, how politically significant is this new position, especially for the U.S.?
Well, the key point about the Pope is he really doesn't have any battalions, as Stalin pointed out quite brutally, after World War II. On the other hand, he is a figure which many countries, including Poland, of course, which is a key country in all this, being right next to the Belarus frontier and being a transit point through to Ukraine. Poland is very, of course, geared to what the Pope is saying. In effect, he said nothing more than the traditional peace everywhere, please. However, it's good that somebody should be making these pleas of a world standing. And the key point, he is of world standing. And there's another issue, which I think you've quite rightly raised. He's an American. And therefore, Donald Trump has sort of mixed feelings. He has already spoken out about what the Pope has stated, his left-wing liberal views, and he certainly doesn't see him as an ally for his world. On the other hand, he does recognize that it's an American Pope and has said that he's dying to meet the Pope. And from that point of view, the Pope may have a very slight influence in one sense. The message of peace actually is quite close to Trump's, because Trump is constantly saying that people should stop fighting and that therefore there is some common ground between them, and this could prove important in the long run.
It's important you raise that because the MAGA group have expressed doubts about this Pope. They say that he might not necessarily be for America, being great again, but how can his seat significantly, affect or influence American politics in terms of who wins in the future?
The key point is that both he and Trump are talking that there must be peace. This is the only common ground between them. It's quite clear the Pope favors more left-wing and Trump is, of course, right-wing, which is why the MAGA correctly stated that this Pope was not going to help make America great. In fact, he's shown no sign of any interest in this. He's more interested in world peace and in some sort of world equality, as far as I can tell. And so that therefore, in that sense, there will be no common ground ideologically. But if both are striving for peace, and Trump has this sort of clout effect, having forced Russia and Ukraine to the table, and of course brought China as well, as we mentioned earlier, the Pope could certainly play a role in this, in helping us avoid World War III, which is of course what in my books I suggested that a war like this in Ukraine would eventually lead to.
Now, thank you so much, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, for joining us to talk about the major stories today. Dr. Marek is Arise International Affairs Analyst.